In March 1990, exactly 30 years and 1 month ago, the last of the units of the Indian Army disembarked at what was then the Madras port. They were tired, they were disappointed, and they were despondent, mainly because no one in India, least of all in Tamil Nadu, understood or appreciated the job that they were sent for in Sri Lanka between 1987 and 1990. The IPKF experience is something that I'm going to talk about 30 years later on Simply Nitin this week. I'm Nitin Gokhale. So what was the IPKF operation? In the summer of 1987, the Indian government led by Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi and the Sri Lankan president, the then Sri Lankan president Jayewardene, signed an accord called the Indo-Sri Lanka Accord, trying to bring peace to Sri Lanka's north and east, mainly to appease Tamil extremists. The other protagonist in that drama was the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam and its leader, Velupillai Prabhakaran. Now that accord was signed in absence of Prabhakaran, who was confined to a hotel in Delhi, in fact the Hotel Ashok, and the accord was signed in Sri Lanka, ostensibly to bring peace between the LTTE and the Sri Lankan government. It was an accord signed in absentia as far as Prabhakaran was concerned. Nevertheless, the Indian government and Rajiv Gandhi in particular wanted the Indian army to send in a body of troops to go and enforce peace between the Tamils and the Sinhali majority in Sri Lanka under that accord. That is why a whole bunch of units started landing in Sri Lanka at the end of July 1987 under the bigger name called Indian Peacekeeping Force. Initially, they were welcomed by the Tamil population in Sri Lanka's north. But later, as months went by and Prabhakaran returned, a bitter man, to Jaffna and to northern Sri Lanka, the LTTE, which was supposed to be India's friend and supported by India, turned against the Indian army, turned against the Indian peacekeeping force. And instead of enforcing peace, the Indian army units, which were inducted hurriedly without much of a thought, actually started fighting the Tamil guerrillas. And at the end of it, after 2.5 years, the Indian army lost more than 1,200 men and officers in that bitter months that they fought insurgency in an alien place in a foreign land. Why was that operation launched and what was the fault of the army or the Indian peacekeeping force? Several books have been written on that, several commentaries have appeared. But the fact is that military operation was launched to fit political expediency and not the other way around. In any military operation, there is an end political objective when military planners actually start an operation. They know exactly at the end of the operation what are they supposed to achieve according to directions given by the political executive. In this case, the political goals or the goalposts kept shifting and the military was then forced to adopt and adapt to the shifting political goals and objectives of the then government under Rajiv Gandhi. That meant that the troops were most of the time unaware of what was the end objective, whether they had to tame the LTTE, whether they had to arrest the LTTE cadres, or they had to kill them. In the initial months, there was so much of confusion, both among the commanders as well as the troops, that India lost many men and officers in those initial months. It was a very hard time for the Indian army. The insurgency in Kashmir began in late 89, early 1990. There was this tension with Pakistan after Operation Brass Tacks, which was launched by the then Army Chief, General K. Sundarji, who in many ways was a brilliant strategist, a brilliant military commander, but who faltered in his judgment about the IPKF operations in retrospect, of course. And he went along with the political decision without giving a second thought to the military planning or the military justification of that operation. And the result is for all of us to see. There are several books I can recommend that you can read. There is Assignment Colombo by the then High Commissioner of India to Sri Lanka, J.N. Dikshit, who was later also Foreign Secretary and National Security Advisor. There is Assignment Jaffna by General S.C. Sardesh Pandey. There is Indian Intervention in Sri Lanka by Rohan Gunaratne, who was a very famous author on insurgency, terrorism and counterinsurgency. And there is, of course, two other books by Indian commanders, the overall force commander of IPKF, Lieutenant General Dipender Singh, who wrote about IPKF experience in Sri Lanka. And there is Harkirat Singh, who was also the GOCNC or the force commander of the IPKF. Even he has written a book. But there is no more grim and I would say depressing book than this, written by Brigadier Ravi Palsokar, who was commanding the 7th Infantry Brigade in Mulai-Tebu, where ironically Prabhakaran was killed almost 29 years later. Brigadier Ravi Palsokar's book, which of course came out in 2012, takes the title from a famous saying of Alfred Lord Tennyson, who said, "Ours not to reason why, ours but to do and die." This is about soldiers and soldiering. The Indian peacekeeping force soldiers and air warriors who went in there, of course, and the Indian naval sailors and officers who went in there did not question the objective, did not question the orders, and actually went on doing their job against extreme odds. There are stories of valor, bravery, sacrifice, and of course, this feeling that one comes out with when you read these books and these accounts, when you speak to people who were there, that this was an intervention, a military intervention, which could have been avoided perhaps. Of course, hindsight is always 20/20. But going by the accounts of all these soldiers who operated there, not much thought was given before the Indian army was rushed into Sri Lanka, and particularly in the north and east of Sri Lanka. Have we learned lessons from there? Well, we'll see if there's another occasion for military intervention by India. But remember, that experience has left huge scars on the psyche of the Indian military leadership of those times. And of course, it also carries on because a lot of analysis would have been done by the military leadership, and a lot of thought would have got into what could have been done right. Many things went wrong, but the fact is, over 1,240 men and officers sacrificed their lives. Years later, almost decades later, the Sri Lankan government has made amends, and for almost 25 years, nobody wanted to speak about the IPKF experience either in the military or in the Indian political establishment, because it was a big blunder as everybody saw it. The Sri Lankans, of course, played their part, particularly President Premadasa, who aligned with the LTTE to get the IPKF out, but finally paid the price with his life because LTTE assassinated him, like they did so many other political stalwarts in Sri Lanka, and then finally met a very gory end in the summer of 2009, which I happen to have reported for 3 years between 2006 and 2009, the Ilam War 4, when I was with NDTV, and happened to first-hand experience the kind of operations, the brutal fighting that went on before the LTT, which was at one time regarded as the world's deadliest terrorist group, was decimated militarily. Rest is history, as they say. More than 10 or 11 years after that defeat in May 2009, Sri Lanka has come a full circle. The then Defense Secretary of Sri Lanka is now the President of Sri Lanka, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who is the younger brother of the then President Mahinda Rajapaksa. And of course, peace for 10 years prevailed in Sri Lanka before Eastern bombings happened in 2019. But Sri Lanka is slowly recovered. So there was, in this IPKF operation, there was muddled political thinking, there was perfidy from all sides, the LTT, the Sri Lankan politicians of that time, and I would say lack of objective understanding of geopolitics on part of the Indian government led by Rajiv Gandhi in those years. In this context, I want to read out to you portions of a letter written by the then Army Chief General V.N. Sharma to the returning troops. It's a very poignant letter and something that touches the heart. On completion of the de-induction of the Indian peacekeeping force from the northeastern province of Sri Lanka, I wish to convey my special shabash to all officers, JCOs and other ranks and civilians of the IPKF. In fulfilling this Herculean and sensitive task, over 1,000 Indian officers, JCOs and men have offered the supreme sacrifice of laying down their lives, and almost thrice that number have been wounded in the course of their duty over the last 2.5 years. I, as your chief, would like to express the pride of the Indian Army and our countrymen in the way you have conducted yourselves despite heavy odds. In carrying out this enormous task, all ranks of the IPKF have displayed exemplary courage, fortitude and devotion to duty in keeping with our high traditions in the service of our country. The whole nation is proud of you. You have successfully fought a Dharam Yudh. Well done, General V.N. Sharma. Well, he was only trying to keep the morale of the troops up. But let me tell you, politicians on both sides, both in Sri Lanka and in Tamil Nadu, where the Tamils were very angry that Indian government was supporting the Sinhalese dominated Sri Lankan government to fight the Tamils in northeastern Sri Lanka, were angry. And therefore, there were demonstrations, there were constant criticism in Tamil Nadu of the IPKF, and they never had any welcome when they returned by ship to Madras, which was the port where the troops used to disembark. But that's politics. The military never looks at politics very favorably, although they serve the political ends of the government of the day. And that's something that the military always battles in its mind, the military men and women who fight in these wars and conflicts that are ordered by the politicians who rule this country or a state or a nation state. But that's the nature of the war, and that is what I wanted to flag almost 30 years after the IPKF returned to India. The scars, as I said, carried on for too long, but hopefully things have now normalized. The relations between the Indian Army and the Sri Lankan Army are very good, and even the cooperation between the two countries is on an even keel now. But those were bad days, and we must take lessons from those adverse days that the Indian Army and the nation as a whole really faced in those years of nearly 2.5 years that the IPKF was deployed in Sri Lanka. For the moment, that's all I have to say, but don't forget to like us on our social media handles, keep sending feedback, and of course, keep sending your suggestions. Although this time I have not taken up suggestions from our readers or viewers, but I promise that next time if you send me some more suggestions, maybe I'll take up one of them and discuss such interesting episodes in our recent history. Until then, stay home, stay safe, goodbye.